Welcome to Authentic Magnetism, the channel. We help coaches, course creators, and spiritual entrepreneurs find their authentic voice and magnetize soul-aligned clients. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and follow along for more. Now let's get on with the episode. Hey everyone. Happy Monday, I guess. So I had a really busy weekend, and this got me really thinking about the splenic center and the physical nature of the splenic energy. So I was just going to come on and talk and not create a slideshow for it, but I wanted to make sure that I really covered some of those strategic elements of the splenic center, which are the kind of selling through the splenic center, the creation of offers with splenic energy, etc. So splenic center, let's talk about some of these key concepts of splenic energy. Splenic energy has a lot to do with well-being, with physical health, with the body energy. And it's also where we hear about the fear gates of the spleen. So that is a part of the splenic center energy. We've got intuition and instinct. They're not necessarily the same thing, but they are both part of the spleen. A lot of times in the splenic energy, you'll have themes of survival programming. This is the center that's kind of connected with the, lizard brain, the cerebellum, the survival programming in our brain. And also addiction can have a real splenic expression. So those are some of the concepts that we're looking at, kind of high level overview of things that are splenic energy. Now, what kind of got me thinking about this is I had a weekend where we were gardening. We were helping my mom with some of her gardens, doing our own gardening. It was I haven't done that kind of gardening in quite a while. My body was certainly feeling it. But that's actually not where I was thinking of the splenic energy. I was actually kind of, as I was doing it, I was kind of going through this, do I want to do a reel about the difference between generators and manifesting generators, because my husband and I both kind of went at this one project, and it was kind of a beautiful way of looking at the way he approaches work and the way I approach work. And my mom's also a generator anyway, but that's not today's. That's not really connected to today's topic of the spleen, but what is connected to that topic is that I also did, I played volleyball, beach volleyball, for the first time in, it's probably been 20 years since I touched a volleyball or more. The peak of my volleyball skills was even before high school. I remember we, as kids, had this 3-on-3 tournament that we went to every year. Anyway, I'm just I haven't played volleyball in a really long time. So we've got this team together. We're going to be playing for the season. So I'm committed to this sport, at least for this season of my life. And I was fully expecting to suck really hard at this skill. And, I think most of the people that we've kind of pieced together to play on this team, they also haven't played volleyball in a while. Most of our motivation for creating this team is to meet some new people, to have some social, to have some fun, that kind of thing. We are not there to really show up to be competitive, although one of the team members was, which was a little awkward for the rest of us. But when I went to play volleyball, I had no reason to expect that I'd even have half decent skills, but my body remembers, right? I was able to, at least some of the time, bump and volley and set with control. I'm not quite tall enough to reach the top of the net when I jump, especially off of sand. But I at least tried, and I wasn't terrible, I think is what I was trying to get at with the story, and what really got me thinking about the physical nature of splenic energy. And that I think because of my defined energy in the spleen, I actually have a very, very defined spleen. I have every single gate of the splenic center defined except for gate 28. So I have a very physical energy in my body that I really take for granted because I have this defined, it's always reliable. I can always rely on myself to have physical applications and physical practice and skills that seem to have this muscle memory that I take for granted, that there is this physical nature to the energy of the spleen. So let's talk about what it looks like if you have a defined spleen. In our definition, we always have our own version or flavor of this energy. We, in our definition, do not get to experience this whole spectrum. We will have our slice, our piece of the pie, and we have a spectrum within that. But there's this element that it's your energy and you don't get the whole piece of the pie, but you get to go really deep and get to really refine what that energy means and what the expression of that energy means. So usually people with defined spleens are going to have a very reliable body sense and intuition and instinct. Even if you don't put words to it, you often have this reliance on intuition or instinct, even if we're kind of explaining it in different ways. So sometimes in the Western world, at least, intuition has a bit of a negative connotation. So people with defined spleens, we may not call it intuition, but you'll have your ways of listening to whatever that cue is for you. And that cue for you, that intuitive hit, that gut instinct, is likely going to be pretty consistent in the way that you interpret it or the way that it comes up in your body and the way that you kind of engage with your instinct and your intuition, which is different from your undefined folks who both the kind of stimulus for the intuition and the response to the intuition are a lot more variable. So another thing about defined spleens is that you often have an ease in physical skills, an ease in developing them, an ease in remembering them, an ease in bringing them back after 20 years of not touching a volleyball. My husband also has a defined spleen, and he had a very similar experience to me. Like he hasn't played volleyball in years, and he was pretty quickly able to kind of physically orient to bring those skills back. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that one, you can develop those skills usually pretty easy. You can practice them, and then you can rely on that physical skill even after several years of not using it. People with defined spleens are often a master of recognizing patterns in the physical world. So the spleen has this connection to survival, to that kind of instinct to protect and have security. So the spleen, people with spleens who are defined, your pattern recognition gets really good. So you often have if you think about this pattern recognition combined with that instinct and awareness piece, now you have this kind of spidey sense for situations that are potentially dangerous to the physical body or potentially dangerous to your survival. Now, we can have a lot of trauma and wounding around this and have it really highly heightened, and that's not ideal, especially when we start talking about what the fears are of the different gates of the spleen. But this is something that with defined spleens, you have to kind of keep this in check to make sure that you're not hyper reacting to, or your instincts aren't kind of set to that high awareness, high alert all of the time, because you're not always in danger. So that's something to kind of work out for the defined spleens, where the balance is between instinct and survival and what your responses are to it. And the last thing that I'm going to mention about defined spleen centers is they often have very strong immune systems, and your physical health can be quite strong in a way. Strong's maybe not the word, but like that physical energy can be quite strong. I always thought before human design that because I grew up on a farm, I had exposure to all of the different bugs and things, and that's why my immune system was so strong. But even people who didn't have that experience in early childhood of being exposed to a lot of different microbiomes can have this experience of having a very strong immune system, and like I never get sick. That's a good indication that you've got a defined spleen. So let's look at the undefined side. Now, I just want to caution everyone, when you start thinking about defined versus undefined, there is this kind of sense that defined equals good and undefined equals bad. And I really want to challenge that, especially for coaches, course creators, spiritual entrepreneurs, because your undefined areas are, one, what you're going to be messaging and selling from, because you're messaging and selling usually to people who are defined where you're not defined. And the other thing about undefined energy is that even though it's not consistent, you get a bigger spectrum of the experience of that energy, because you're experiencing my defined spleen and my piece of the pie when you're around me, and you're just experiencing somebody else's defined spleen and their experience of it when you're around them. And as undefined people or parts of our chart, we're going to amplify that energy and bring it back. So you have this experience in your undefined centers to really go deep and get wise and figure out all of the different ways that energy can be used, and all of the healthy and unhealthy ways that that energy can be experienced. And we call that conditioning, but I want you to really challenge yourself to think, just because it's undefined doesn't mean it's not something that's, one, useful in business, or two, bad. It is definitely, your undefined places are where you really teach from. Your defined energy is more like where you do done for you things, or where you build for yourself, right? Like you're building out your courses usually from your defined energy, but you're teaching from your undefined, if that kind of puts it into context for you. Okay, so undefined, you get to sample everyone's energy, so you get super wise on what this energy looks like. And you experience this full spectrum of splenic energy. You don't just experience one little slice going super deep. You get to kind of bounce off of all the different people around you and sample that energy. So you, like reflectors, will get this sense of how to utilize that energy in a healthy way. And you get to be able to be in that position of being able to guide people in how to express that energy. You may not have as reliable of a body sense or intuition or instinct, because it's going to look like a different kind of trigger's not the word, but there's going to be a different, the stimulus isn't always going to trigger the same response in you, unlike our defined splenic folk, where typically there'll be patterns in the way that their instinct gets triggered, or their intuition is applied and utilized, and like the pattern in the type of body sensation that they get, for example, that indicates yes or no, or whatever that looks like. There's also, I want to kind of have an awareness of issues around addiction and codependency. So undefined spleens and defined spleens in relationships together can have this, if they're not aware of it, can have a bit of an unhealthy codependent sort of relationship, because the undefined spleen experiences all these fears. You're amplifying it. So when I talk about the fear gates, you get to experience all of them. It's not necessarily your fear, but you get to process all that stuff. And the people who are defined, that energy is always there. They've experienced it for their whole life, and they get good at navigating that energy, probably better at navigating that energy. So they have this kind of confidence around things. Like a lot of the fears are associated with things like survival. So the codependency a lot of times comes from the undefined's reliance on the defined to create a bit of stability and certainty around it. And it feels really uncomfortable a lot of times for those undefined spleens to pull away from relationships, even if they aren't healthy, with defined spleens. Now, the example I want to give of this, it was a very public example, but Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So Johnny Depp has an undefined spleen. Amber Heard has a defined spleen. And if you followed any of that drama, I feel like a lot of the ways that it was expressed was an unhealthy way of how this undefined and defined spleen kind of got hooked on each other, and then they there was this real difficulty in pulling away, even though they weren't good for each other. Okay, so also with undefined spleens, you're going to experience a lot less consistency with your immune system and your physical health and the physical skills that you utilize and leverage. So I also want to bring up another story about this kind of energy to kind of give you a bit of context of how it might work as a coach, as a course creator, as someone who's in this teaching, healing type of business. I was a massage therapist for many years. I was a very good massage therapist. I have an incredible intuitive sense about bodies, about when the tissue is going to do whatever it's going to do. I have a good sense for the instinct of how much pressure to apply, where, what direction, how to really. Anyway, I'm a good massage therapist. At some point in my career, I decided to start teaching massage therapy. And massage therapy, in my experience, is highly intuitive. But what I didn't realize at that time, because this was pre-human design for me, it was pre-having any kind of awareness that just because I was very good at doing this thing did not necessarily translate into being able to teach that thing. Because what I really wanted to teach was that intuitive way of engaging with somebody's body and somebody's energy. And I really didn't understand why I couldn't express that to my students. And I think now, as I'm putting that in context and reflecting on how that worked, is that I only had my experience of the physical cues that led to that intuitive experience. And a lot of them are very subtle. And not everybody has the same body awareness, and not everyone has the same cues as to what it's, what it feels like. So I was trying to explain it based on what I felt in another's body. And a lot of that isn't explainable. So I was kind of coming up against this block as I was trying to encourage students to listen with their bodies. So, in retrospect, I probably would have been better off doing more of the theory-based courses in massage therapy rather than trying to teach a physical and intuitive skill that I really only know in the way that I know it. Now, I have a lot of experience in the spleen. Again, I've got every single gate except gate 28 defined in the spleen. So I do have a pretty good depth of what this experience looks like and of what intuition, and I've got different ways of intuiting and that kind of thing, but it's still, I was also a new teacher. So, it's not to say that if you're defined, you can't teach a physical skill. That is not how that works. But if I look back on that situation, and if I had have had this awareness of my definition was creating this blinder for me about how to teach it and how to express it and how people could find their own way rather than finding my way of doing it. So having an awareness around when you have defined energy, it's always going to be your way, which doesn't mean you can't teach on that subject. If I wanted to teach in the realm of health and well-being, I've had a lot of actually experience teaching in health and well-being because I have so much energy in my spleen. I have a lot of experience in these areas. But I have to have an awareness that when I'm teaching on subjects like this that are kind of connected to that defined spleen energy, I only have my way and my experience. So if you're teaching things in your defined areas, you're usually teaching your process and your interpretation of how to do something in that energy. So bring some awareness to this. I think it's kind of an interesting example of it. But a lot of times we're coaching from our undefined spaces because that's where we're super experienced of different ways of expressing that energy. So I'm going to put that out there. So let's talk a little bit about the fear gates of the spleen. The spleen it's a little bit intimidating to think about them as fear gates, but they bring this theme. And a lot of the fear gates are associated with kind of that survival theme and that survival programming of the spleen. So gate 48, we've got it associated with a fear of inadequacy. the fear of not knowing enough, not being enough, not being the right fit or the right person to do the thing or teach on the thing. Gate 58, fear of the future or fear of the unknown. If I do this, I don't know what's going to happen. Gate 44, fear of the repeating mistakes or fear of the past is sometimes how you see this. So the fear that you're not going to have that pattern recognition to be able to do better next time. Now at gate 50, we've got fear of responsibility, fear of not knowing what's too much. Gate 32, fear of lack of resources. Gate 32 is really the gate of like survival, right? Like I'm not going to have enough of XYZ, food, money, whatever that looks like to survive. And or to thrive or to whatever. Or maybe the fear is around resources for the tribe, because we've got a lot of tribal sort of themes coming out in the splenic energy as well. Gate 28, fear of purposelessness, fear that there is no why to why we're on earth. And then gate 18 is fear of authority. So let's take a look at the fear gates, but kind of flipping it around and saying like, what is the real gem in having some of these fear gates defined? So gate 48 is that we have this potential for depth and mastery in that gate. Gate 57, you've got this intuitive sense for patterns that help you navigate the future and navigate the unknown and predict patterns that may happen. Gate 44 is learning from past situations and being able to synthesize that into a way of being and learning that you can apply to the future and to the now. Gate 55 is learning what responsibilities are going to be beneficial for you to take on and what might not be so good for you to take on. Gate 32 is an instinct for utilizing resources successfully, for leveraging what you have to make more, to survive better, to survive not just for yourself, but also for your family, for your tribe, etc. Gate 28 is a good one for discerning what is worth the fight, what is worth the struggle. And gate 28 is a very strategic gate. In human design, it's called gate of the game player. And there's this level of strategy and risk that is associated with the gate 28. So if you are expressing that in a healthy way, you're taking risks on the things that you instinctively and intuitively know are going to pay dividends on you. And then gate 18, what can you fix or make better? And remember, this one was fear of authority. So this is kind of in the sense of like, systemically, how can I have an impact that's going to make things better for everybody else? Okay, so let's talk about what the spleen looks like when we're talking about offers. So again, I kind of have this, and it might be a little too simple to say your defined energy is what you do and the done for you things and the things you use to build for yourself, because there's a lot of different ways that you can apply it in your business for your clients, that your defined energy can be a huge part of what you teach on. So I also don't want you to kind of start thinking that defined equals I can't be successful teaching here. It's just, you do need to bring that awareness to when you're teaching on your method, on your way of doing things and your way of being in that defined energy. Another thing about defined energy and how it kind of engages with us in customer facing and one-to-one situations is that we, with most of your defined energy, if you have somebody who's undefined, they're going to pick up on that energy while they're in your aura. So they're going to be able to utilize that energy as if it's their own. So last week I was talking about how gate 20 and 34 had been activated in the transits, making everybody basically have access to the Pure Manifesting Generator channel, the channel of charisma. I love when the 20's on. I also love when I know I'm around people who have the 20 defined, because it lights up so much of my chart. So, but what I'm saying is, like, you don't know most of the time when you're engaging with people, but you're going to attract people who are undefined where you're defined, and vice versa. So most of the time you find that complementary situation of people being undefined where you're not. So it's not necessarily something you deliberately apply, but I do want you to have this awareness that your definition is going to influence you in a very specific, very defined, I'm going to arguably say rigid way of expressing that energy. Whereas you're undefined, you have this whole spectrum experience. So offers, if you have an undefined spleen, it's kind of like a green light for you to work with people on offers around health and well-being, around instinct and intuition, also around themes like safety, security, resources, things like that. And if you have a defined spleen, I want you to consider how, and if it's appropriate, maybe that's a little too harsh, but how does your defined energy influence your experience of this? And are there opportunities to kind of leave open-ended questions for people to put their own spin on what it is you're teaching? Okay, so let's talk about undefined and defined in terms of selling. So we are always going to be selling through our undefined centers. So when you think about it, even if you're defined and your product has to do with some of these defined spleen themes, if you're defined, your messaging and the things that you're talking about you're going to sell with a different center. So for example, you're selling a health program, that's great, but you're going to sell it through, let's say, your undefined solar plexus, and sell through that kind of emotional center rather than selling through your undefined spleen. The undefined centers, you can use messaging around splenic themes. And the big part of this messaging is around helping people let go of what's not serving them. People who have defined spleens have a really hard time letting go of things and letting go of, concepts, beliefs, fears. It can manifest in the physical sense. It can manifest in excess weight. Overeating as a coping mechanism is 100% a spleen problem. And I think a lot of that is because you're aiming to numb your body's indications that enough is enough, and you want to override that. And I think that's definitely something that comes in the splenic umbrella of themes, and it can be really hard to know and hard to figure out. Letting go of coping mechanisms or addictions is another huge theme in the undefined spleen kind of umbrella of things that they could teach on. If you're defined, you're teaching from your own experience, system, or process, and you're not going to be as adaptable in the content from this center. Okay, so remember my story about teaching massage. I wasn't really able to adapt my teaching to every single student in that way. And that was a real challenge because I could show them the actual process, but I got frustrated when they just copied my process and they weren't able to take it, make it their own, and apply their intuition to make it super effective. So just food for thought. If you are defined in the spleen and you're selling in defined, or if you're selling something from this umbrella category of things, your messaging to sell it has to be from a different center. And you have to have an awareness that your way is your way. And it's going to be really hard for you to understand when it's not part of your way and your system. So let's talk a little bit about how the fear gates are going to engage with your messaging, because it's something that I think as like if you're using your splenic center to market, you have to have a very good awareness of the role of fear in your marketing. Now, selling and marketing and messaging, they are intrinsically manipulation, a process of manipulation, which is okay. People they need to know the things that you're telling them to be able to buy your product. And the people that you're selling to typically want your product. So with your messaging, you are setting them up to understand the benefits that they can get from that product. But in our world, I think a lot of times we do see a lot of this fear-based messaging that the products don't necessarily deliver on the back end. And that's something you have to have a good handle on when you're utilizing that, and talking about the fears of the splenic center, because it can be very much out of alignment for you to market based on fears. Now, let's take an example of something you see all the time that I don't think is intrinsically out of alignment to base marketing off of fear. And I think where it comes down to is kind of making more money, making abundance, or helping people create stability and abundance in their life. And you see a lot of the undertones of this kind of messaging and marketing based on fear and like that survival fear sort of tone of the spleen. So if your product actually delivers a solution to that fear, you can use it, but I would caution you to use it sparingly in your messaging because it is very manipulative, and it can count your tone. If you don't hit the exact right tone when you're talking kind of through those fears of the spleen, it does come off very obviously manipulative. So it's kind of one of those, use with caution, use sparingly. But if your product delivers a solution to that fear, it can be in integrity to use that messaging in your marketing, but just have some awareness around how it manipulates people. All right. So a couple reflections. I'm going to leave you with a couple reflections on the splenic theme. So are you addicted to something right now? Are you addicted to something in your business? Do you think something, are you hanging on to something that maybe you're hanging on to an old way of messaging that's just not working anymore? Where are you hanging on to things, people's habits and thoughts that you can let go of? Are you caring for your body and your physical health? When do you ignore your own instincts? And am I letting my mind override my instincts? So those are some themes to think about. I've given you quite a bit of food for thought on the splenic center, about how it connects to offers, about how it connects to the messaging that we talk about, and where you might be able to really highlight your skills and expertise in splenic energy, whether you are defined or not defined. Thanks so much for being with me all the way through this presentation, and we will see you next time. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, check the show notes or the description for a link to book a one-on-one call with me. If you're tired of trying to do this all one-on-one and you want some attention specifically for you, nobody else in the room, this is the session for you. We spend 5 hours taking your chart apart, taking all of the pieces that are relevant for your business, your life, etc. So it is amazing to apply this knowledge. If you like this video, please consider liking, sharing, telling all your friends about this channel, and we will see you again next time.